little truth in the old refrain that one cannot legislate equality. Laws not only provide concrete benefits, they can even change the hearts of men. Some men, anyhow, for good or evil.
July 2nd, 1908 was a great day in history. The next great proponent of justice for all colored men and women was born. Thurgood Marshall was brought into this world. However, in second grade, he changed his name from Thurgood to Thurgood. Thurgood Marshall took a stand in history by defending African Americans who were treated unfairly through American law. Just like his older self, Thurgood rebelled against authority. As a child, Thurgood Marshall got into trouble at school. He was forced to stay in the basement, read and understand the Constitution well enough to explain what he read to the principal. By the time he left school, he knew the Constitution verbatim. Young Marshall just could not understand how segregation could exist when the Constitution promised everyone, colored or white, the same rights. His father, Will Marshall, told him that the Constitution is the way things should be, but isn't. Thurgood grew frustrated and angry. He decided that when he grew up, he would change the treatment of blacks in America. When Thurgood Marshall was young, he didn't compromise on his values. One day in high school, a white man called him the N-word. Thurgood hit the man because his father told him that if anybody called him that name, Thurgood had his father's orders to fight the man who called him that name. But he understood that he couldn't always fight physically. He wasn't accepted to many law schools because of the color of his skin. It was the same for voting and many other privileges in America. Thurgood learned that violence wasn't the only way to fight. He found his way through the law. In 1925, Thurgood graduated from high school. Marshall enrolled in Lincoln University. During his time at Lincoln University, he worked hard and learned his way around the law. He fell in love and got married, but he was looking to his next step, a law degree. Because of his race, he was not accepted to his first school of choice, the University of Maryland. He later wound up going to Howard University in Washington, D.C. Marshall's favorite teacher was a lawyer named Charles Hamilton Houston. Houston taught that the law was the tool that blacks could use to change the status quo. Thurgood Marshall took these words to heart, becoming extremely skilled in his field, but not only through raw talent, but also effort. This paid off when he finished law school in 1933 at the top of his class. Marshall was an unusual lawyer. He wanted to be a social engineer, a person that used the law to change society for the better. He used his skills to help others, not to become rich. Many of his clients were poor blacks. Marshall would soon be known as the little folks lawyer, someone whom poor people could turn to for help. Right after graduating, Thurgood opened a private practice for a short period of time. He cooperated with the NAACP on a few cases. One case Marshall and the NAACP worked on together was Murray v. Pearson in 1938. A black high school graduate did not get admission to the University of Maryland, the same white school which Marshall was denied admission to. Marshall sued the university for the black graduate with the help of the NAACP, and together they won the case. At this moment in time, Marshall wondered how he could make enough money as he was a bit strained on cash. To get another job, he contacted his former mentor Charles Hamilton Houston and asked whether the NAACP would be willing to pay $150 a month for his services. Houston responded with an even better offer, and Thurgood accepted immediately. This was the official beginning of Thurgood's time as a full-fledged civil rights lawyer. He started fighting the good fight immediately. He won a case stating that in the county surrounding Baltimore, the county must pay for the tuition of black seniors in high school, and he was very successful with cases of equal pay. Several times, he helped win black teachers equal pay as white teachers in many counties and cities. In 1938, after Houston retired, Marshall was named chief counsel for the NAACP in New York. Using the extra money he got from his new position, he moved to Harlem. But his position became even bigger in 1940 when he founded the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund and became its director counsel. This was a completely different organization from the NAACP. There were more lawyers and assistants employed under him. Now he could focus on the bigger and more important cases. For some of these cases, he put his life on the line. To investigate a lynching on a plantation in Mississippi, Marshall and the executive director of the NAACP, Walter White, disguised themselves as sharecroppers, which were the Southern replacement of slaves in the 1900s. Marshall said that the owner of the plantation brought one of his big Cadillacs with 30 rifles in the back with about 3 other men. If the plantation owner found out about his identity, it would have been Marshall's end. But he took a stand and put his life on the line to bring the guilty party to justice. In the 1940s and 50s, a significant amount of legal progress was made in terms of civil rights. Thurgood Marshall definitely contributed in a big way. In 1940, Marshall won his first Supreme Court case, Chambers v. Florida. The case dealt with police pressuring for a confession that violated due process of law, and that was just the beginning. His appearances in the Supreme Court made him one of the country's top lawyers. Smith v. Allwright in 1944 dealt with the exclusion of black voters in the primaries in Texas. Marshall won this case as well. Marshall helped the oppressed blacks in Texas by giving them their voice and giving them the opportunity to vote. In 1950, the rulings of both Sweatt v. Painter and McLaurin v. Oklahoma State Regents ruled separate but equal facilities, which was the legal basis for segregation for grad students and professionals in state universities, as unconstitutional. And in 1954, Brown v. Board continued upon Sweatt v. Painter and McLaurin v. Oklahoma State Regents. To quote Chief Justice Earl Warren, "We conclude unanimously that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." Thurgood Marshall crushed all of the legal support of segregation and provided the foundation for the continued civil rights movement, which eventually led to civil rights legislation. By being an excellent lawyer and winning 29 out of 32 Supreme Court cases, Thurgood Marshall stood up for the colored men and women of America and gave them their constitutional rights.
Well, ultimately it goes back to the Chambers versus Florida case of 1940. At this time, Marshall is a young lawyer, he's 32 years old, and he's rising up through the ranks of the NAACP, and as a civil rights lawyer, there's not that many at the time. It's a very limited opportunities for African Americans in legal education. And with the success he gets with Chambers versus Florida, he uses his public support to begin NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. Well, ultimately, there's reasons why he's so successful. The first is that he uses legal reasoning to demonstrate just the flawed logic of Jim Crow laws, of institutional racism. By using the legal language and the structures set up in the Constitution and the legal system to demonstrate the injustice of the system, and it becomes unarguable to continue many of these laws. A second reason is that he was, for a large part, a political figure. He viewed, and he was trained from early on to see the law and his actions as a civil rights lawyer to be a way of doing social engineering, to bring about change in discrimination laws against African Americans. And politically, he's going to act to curry favor with major political figures around the country to get his points and his issues passed. So most notably with his relationship with the Kennedy administration and President John F. Kennedy, but also lesser known is his relationship with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover.
In 1961, after over 20 years of being a civil rights lawyer, Thurgood Marshall was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit by John F. Kennedy. 4 years later, Lyndon B. Johnson appointed him as the Solicitor General of the United States. On June 13, 1967, Marshall was nominated to the Supreme Court by President Johnson. On August 30, 1967, after a long debate, Marshall was confirmed as Supreme Court Justice. He was the first African American to sit on the Supreme Court as a justice. During this time, Marshall and the other 8 justices gave different types of rights. The ruling for Roe v. Wade indicates this. In Roe v. Wade, the court ruled that women have the right to have an abortion. After 23 years, Marshall retired from the Supreme Court at age 82 on June 27, 1991, and he died on January 24, 1993. Marshall did a lot to further society and help shape America to the way it currently is. He legally ended the basis for segregation by declaring the separate but equal doctrine unconstitutional. Thurgood Marshall won both the Spingarn Medal, which is annually given to a member of the NAACP, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Evidently, Marshall was a marvelous lawyer, a righteous justice, but most of all, a civil rights activist that gave back to his country.